Good stuff, guys. If you are an American, Western person living in the first world, I don't know if you mean that last line that we just sang, honestly. We don't want anything, we just want you. I don't know. We're kind of an agenda people, aren't we? We kind of want a task list. We kind of want our wish list fulfilled. That's just to meddle with you. Ruth Vigneault, wave your hand, Ruth. There she is. She told me years ago, she's been a saint around here for many, many years. When I first got here and started to, mess with people, she said, "Pastor, now you're meddling." It's kind of like a stop that kind of thing. Well, this series is going to meddle. Just to let you know, I had a guy come up to me after last service, a great crosswalker, good friend, and he said, you've taught some whoppers in the past, but I got a hunch that this one's going to tick off more people than anything else. I was like, really? He says, yeah. And he said, to use Ruth's words, it's because you're meddling. You're messing with some stuff. So that may happen to you, and I'm totally cool with that, because this is some pretty rich stuff. And really the gist of this whole series is based on a book by Richard Rohr called Everything Belongs. The second chapter is called Vision of Enchantment. I want to be real clear. I'm not teaching, even though I'm working through this book and working through his principles, especially because of the kind of weird stuff that gets said around stuff. What I'm going to try to do here is every week, this is not an easy book to just teach. It's not linear in any way. So I'm getting the chapters down really well, deeply, wrestling with them, and then helping you see them through some biblical narrative along the way and see what happens. So that sort of counters the whole thing. Oh, Pete's going on an unbiblical teaching again, because there's a lot of Bible stuff that we're going to be talking about in theology. But this is deeply spiritual stuff that we're working with. And if you've started to read the book, if you've tried to read the book, we sold out last week, which is great. You probably found out real quick. This is not a quick read. And so just to help you realize that, on the next slide, this kind of gives you the gist of what Rohr's after. And this is right out of the second chapter. By the way, there's a whole lot of quotes that didn't make the cut for today, but I put them in my blog because they're just so awesome. So if you want to read more stuff, and the prayer that we just did for 9/11, that's also on my blog today. So the purpose of the exploration of prayer is not to get anywhere. My starting point is that we're already there. We cannot attain the presence of God because we're already totally in the presence of God. What's absent is awareness. Prayer, which is what this whole thing is about, even taking prayer to our deepest, most painful places. Prayer is not primarily saying words or thinking thoughts. It is rather a stance. It's a way of living in the presence, living in awareness of the presence, and even of enjoying the presence. The full contemplative, this is the style of prayer we're talking about, is not just aware of the presence, but trusts, allows, and delights in it. It's a lot to say about what we're looking at, and it's wonderful if you'll go there with them. But first, let's do a little geography lesson. So on the next slide, let's have a clue here. Give Ted a little nightmare here for the camera. Okay, so you're probably familiar with this part of the world, but maybe not real familiar with it because we don't look at it all that much. But you see Iran there, that's the big blue one, kind of in the middle. Iraq is to the left, to the right is Afghanistan. Thank you. Oh, that's cool. Nicely done, Ted. All right. Just above Kuwait, kind of maybe halfway between Baghdad and Kuwait, or maybe just a little above north of Kuwait, northwest of Kuwait. That was where the ancient city of Ur was. Everybody say Ur. Isn't that a great name? Where are you from? Ur, right? Pretty good. Okay, so that's the map. And Israel is this tiny little sliver on the left side. You can barely see it. It's like the size of New Jersey among all these giants here. And it's always, thank you very much, it's always part of the news somewhere. So that's today. Now the next slide shows you what it looked like a long time ago. So there's Ur. And that's where Abraham's family started. Now his dad took the family from Ur up to Haran, which was about 600 miles away. Took the whole family. Pretty successful guy, had a bunch of sons and daughters and sheep and stuff. And they hung out there for some period of time. I'm telling you that because I want to tell you a little bit about this guy. Now I'm going to butcher the name left and right. At the start of the story he's called Abram. Later on his name is changed to Abraham. But what I want you to get, even though I'm going to use them interchangeably probably, is I want you to first see that the family left home, which was in Ur. They left for some reason, because they knew they needed to move forward. And they knew they couldn't do what they sensed they needed to do where they were. And so they made a long journey, 600 miles by foot. That's like, what, Tijuana from here. That's a long journey by foot. And they camped out there for a while, and at some point, on the next slide, this is what we see in Genesis 12. The Lord had said to Abram, "Leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. All the families on earth will be blessed through you." So Abraham departed as the Lord had instructed, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old. 75 years old. Remember that, when he left Haran. Now, let me talk for a moment before we go any further. So I give you an article on the blog today, a link to an article by a guy named Peter Enns, who is, I was introduced to by Lauren Haas, a great biblical scholar, theologian. And he gives you an idea, a reference point for understanding when this was written, when it was finally put down. The stories were in circulation. People were talking about Abraham as the people all the while, but they were finally put down from a post-exilic period by the priests. They hadn't collected it all in one spot. And the reason that matters is because the stories that we read in Genesis have the flavor of not being number one anymore. It's like 9/12 is when they're reading, not 9/11. Or not 9/10, when everything was fine. It's like Genesis was finally recorded on 9/12, when it's all gone to hell. And what they're trying to do as they bring together their collective narrative is they're trying to tell the story not just of the individual people, but of the people. How do we understand God? How do we understand each other? How do we understand what it means to be the Jewish people? All that stuff. So when we see the story of Abraham, they're not just seeing a story about a guy. They're seeing a story about an entire people. This is who we are. This reflects us, is what you're seeing. So keep that in mind when you read that and when you hear this, because there are parts of this story that reflect us as well. I'm wondering what the heck is going on with Abraham. He's the number one son. He's going to inherit all this stuff. His dad is way over 100 years old. His dad dies somewhere like 200 years old, which is another many years away. I'm sure they had a lot of wealth. I'm sure they had prestige in Haran. Things were good. So I'm wondering what in the world caused this guy to go. Now maybe he just had one of these wacky, crazy visions from God where the light shined on him. It was like, oh, you know, kind of a thing, and he knows this is God. And he paints this picture that is so beautiful and so filled with potentiality and possibility. It's this dream vision. He's like, I am so in. I so want that. Maybe that's what happened, because sometimes those things compel us to go forward and leave where we are in our comfort and our security and take a major step forward into the unknown. Maybe that's what was going on. Or maybe there were some other things that were also in the mix that we don't really know from the story, but we know from life. Because sometimes the thing that moves us forward is not potential or possibility, but pain. Now, I'm sure that you grew up in a perfect family. But we know Abraham's family wasn't perfect. We know it because we can read along in the story a little bit more. We don't know a lot before this point, but we know some weird things that happen after this. There's some weirdness in this DNA. There's some interesting character traits in this family. And my hunch is that they didn't just show up once Abraham left. I think these things are kind of generational. You know, I see things in myself and not things that I'm real happy of or proud of, and then I think back to my own family history, and I'm like, oh man, I'm struggling with the same stuff my dad struggled with or my grandfather struggled with. I mean, it's funny how that works, isn't it? Sort of embedded somehow in us. And so I'm just wondering if maybe it wasn't just the grand vision. But I wonder, maybe it was this way. And this is conjecture, right? So I'm speculating here, having a little bit of fun with you, but I think that's legit. We can do that. That was a rabbinical thing to do, so let's do that. I just wonder if maybe there were some dynamics that just weren't altogether pleasant, even in the midst of their success. I wonder if Abram and Sarai had some conversations into the night. Childless at 75 years old, he's like, man, this is just not the way we were hoping it was going, and my brothers keep giving me a bunch of bull about it, and I'm wondering too, and I'm just tired of being treated like, I can't believe my brother said that, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I just wonder if they had some conversations that were like, if only there was another option. And the reason I say that is because that's how life works, is we get to a point of pain where all of a sudden we realize we're able to hear. It's like our ears are open, our eyes are opened. We're at a space that I'll talk about a little bit more called a space of liminality, where we can finally hear the new thing and wrestle with it. And I wonder if it was just at one of those kinds of moments where this epiphany kind of thing happens. And the reason I wonder that is because that seems to be the way it works with me. It's not at the times when I feel like I'm on top of the world. It's not at the times when I'm full of myself that all of a sudden I sense the Spirit of God whispering something to me. No, most of the time it's when I'm on my knees because I've been kicked in the gut somehow by myself most of the time. That's when we have eyes to see, ears to hear. And I wonder if that was some of the backstory. We don't know. But I wonder if that's some of the backstory in the mix for an Abraham-type experience. And I wonder, as they're putting this story down, if they're saying to their whole community, hey, pay attention to this, because sometimes God calls us to move forward. And when I thought about Abraham, I thought about Jesus, which is his story about a similar kind of thing is on the next slide. So one day, Jesus came from Nazareth. Oh, by the way, just to clue you in on Abraham again. So he'd already gone 600 miles. Now he's going 400 miles, which if they made 10 miles a day with all their stuff, that's 40 days. 40 days that they're on this journey, which I find kind of interesting. 40 days-ish, somewhere in there. It's a long journey away. They did not want weekend visitors, is what we're saying. Right? Okay, now we follow into Jesus. And this is 25-ish hundred years later. And one day Jesus came from Nazareth in Galilee. And John, who was his cousin, somehow baptized him in the Jordan River. If you're new to the whole story, John, sometimes called John the Baptist, he was starting a movement within the Jewish community. There was fever pitch excitement that God was going to come in, break into history, and put Israel back on top. And so he was kind of trying to get people ready. And he really sensed that that was his mission. And his parents were very devout people, and certainly they talked about it. There was apocalyptic fever, going nuts at that time. Like, it's all going to end real quick. God's going to bring it all together. And John the Baptist is baptizing people, saying, hey, get ready, man, because God's going to come. God's going to do God's thing. And so Jesus is on board with that. And Jesus came up out of the water. As Jesus came up out of the water, he saw the heavens splitting apart and the Holy Spirit descending on him like a dove. And a voice from heaven said, you are my dearly loved Son, and you bring me great joy. Then the Spirit then compelled Jesus to go into the wilderness, where he was tempted by Satan, the accuser, for 40 days. It's like being out on a camping trip with the district attorney. That's kind of the language here. Truly. For 40 days. A period of time is what 40 days really means. He was out among the wild animals, and angels took care of him. Now, when I think about this passage, I want to warn you about something that is a problem that we run into in American Christianity, is that we want to make Jesus a superhero. We want to make him Superman. And if we could put a cape on him, we would. But in the back of our minds, the Spirit, using an Edna Mole's voice, is saying, no capes, right? Because we can't do that. And I know that's the way we want to think. We want to, theologically, we are very prone in our space and time to think of God as a super being, which is a reflection of a God different, a little better than ourselves, but really like us somehow. And we want Jesus to be this fully God thing walking around all the time. There are even some some stories that didn't make the cut of the Bible about Jesus, when he was a little boy doing superhero tricks and stuff, kind of like a kid running around with scissors, very dangerous, and doing some stuff that probably should, not any laser beams coming out of his eyes or anything, but kind of like that, kind of crazy stuff. I want you to just drop that idea. Let Jesus be a Jewish peasant in the first century. Let him be a guy who was in despair, really, because I think he was. Let Jesus be the guy who's the head of the household, because Dad died many years ago. And Jesus is supposed to be keeping this thing going. He's got brothers and sisters to feed. He's got Mom to look after. And the only skill he's got is making cabinets, which is great today, but not so great back then. It was not a high-earning job. It was not a high-respect job. And I think Jesus at times was like, oh my God, can it get any worse? We haven't had a good meal in a week. He's probably feeling shame because neighbors have had to take care of him. He feels like he's supposed to be something special. His mom whispers stuff now and then, and it's not. It's as far from special as you can get. And I think he hears his cousin talking about this grand thing of God culminating history and redemption and blah, 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 blah. And I think he's like, oh, man, I hope that's true. All right, John, let's do this. I hope so. I'm on board with you. And I wonder at that moment, I wonder if the person who was surprised the most when he came up out of the water was Jesus himself. Really. If we let Jesus be Jesus, a Jewish peasant in the first century, who's feeling like a loser, who's feeling like God may have even walked away. And now he hears, you are my dearly loved son, and you bring me great joy. How many of you need to hear that, by the way? Really? Because you feel like, you feel awful. And you don't want to imagine any other different kind of a thing. How many of you need to hear, you're my dearly loved child, and you bring me right now, right where you are, even though you feel pretty messed up, you bring me great joy. And here is my Spirit on you. I think Jesus needed to hear it. And again, this is hard for us to hear because we've made Jesus a superhero and we don't think he ever needed to hear it. We kind of excuse around this thing, and other Gospels even say, well, we had to make this happen, sort of make him above this kind of a thing, like, oh, this is just a matter of course kind of a thing. But that doesn't make sense to me. And I think thinking about this in different angles and stuff only helps us. At least helps me. So Jesus has this inbreaking experience of God, which is blowing his mind. And then I wonder if, because he's kind of in this vulnerable space where the soil is pretty well churned and pretty fertile now and something can take root, I wonder if then he was able to experience verse 12. The Spirit then compelled Jesus to go into the wilderness, where he was tempted by the accuser for 40 days, for a period of time. Because I think sometimes we have to be in a certain place to even hear. Rohr talks about this. He borrows a term from Buddhist tradition. He calls it developing the beginner's mind. The beginner's mind. And it's a place where we recognize that as much as we think we know, we really don't know anything. We really don't know anything. As much as we think we see, we're blind. We don't really know anything. So I have a fun task for you. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to turn to somebody next to you and say, you don't know anything. Doesn't that feel good? That feels good. Okay, now what I want you to do is turn to that same person and says, you're right, I don't know anything. The sooner we can get to that place of, I don't know anything, the better off we are, because that is the beginner's mind. That is the place of openness. That is the place where we are able to see new things, see the ways that we hadn't seen before. And this vision thing matters. If we don't see well, we're probably going to miss some really obvious things. We're not going to see the movement of God in our own life, with our own pain, all of our stuff. We're not going to see it. In fact, on the next slide, Richard Rohr says this: if we are to believe Jesus, nothing is more dangerous than people who presume they already see. God can most easily be lost by being thought found. And I can speak to this because, you know, part of my story, just as brief as I can make it, I didn't really share this with a whole lot of people at the time because it was my own personal struggle. But, you know, after year 4 or 5 here, I was cooked. And I was ready to quit, resign, not to go to another church, but to anything but ministry. I was toast. And it was because, in my mind, the way I saw things was that what I was selling, Jesus, was about this. I thought I was seeing this much of the story of what God was trying to get out, the good news, whatever. And I was almost done with my doctorate, and I thought, well, if I'm going to quit, I better know what I'm quitting. And so I did my whole thesis stuff all on salvation. What is salvation? Soteriology is the fun word. And then the other half, because my doctorate isn't a PhD, it's more like an MD, because there's this practical component. So the other part, the practical part, was in adult transformational learning theory, which I'll get to in a bit. But what I learned in that saved my life. I'm not kidding. And it saved my faith, and it saved my ministry, and I'm still cooking on it. You know what I found out? I found out that what I thought was this, I thought this was the good news. Actually, I was only seeing like this. Seeing just a small chunk. And the more I discovered, the more I studied, I discovered the enormity of the beauty of the message that God was trying to get out from cover to cover in the Bible. Why couldn't I see it? Because of this. Because I was so sure I knew what I was talking about, that I had no room to learn anything else. Beginner's mind matters because it affects your vision. Beginner's mind is saying, I really don't know anything. And so then we're open to learning more. Most of the time, when I tick people off around here, the accusation will be, you're not being biblical. But you know what I'm really doing? I'm messing with a tradition's way of understanding the Bible. I mean, that's what's happening. And I know that's what's happening because that's where I was. I only could think about it one way because I was pretty sure I knew the answer. And then the pain was bad enough that I started to look again and found more. And now I know that I need to be on the watch for what I'm missing out on now. Because maybe I'm just as arrogant now. You probably would agree with that. We'll see. But I wonder if you can be with me on that and understand that. And actually, it's not just arrogance and stuff. It's more than that. On the next slide, Rohr starts to meddle with us. Fasten your seatbelt, Ruth. Here it comes. So Richard Rohr says, the older we get, the more we've been betrayed and hurt and disappointed, the more barriers we put up to the beginner's mind. We must never presume that we see. We must always be ready to see anew. But it's so hard to go back, to be vulnerable, to say to your soul, I don't know anything. For by and large, what blocks spiritual teaching is the assumption that we already know. I can relate. I can relate because there have been painful seasons in my life where I was ready to see. We know, counselors tell us this, that your discontent has to be stronger than whatever you're dealing with to push you to finally do something. And I've been there a handful of times in my life, but also I have to admit to you that I know there's stuff in my life that I need to work on. But I'm that guy. I'm like, oh, no, I need to take a look at that. But I really don't want to because everything I'm seeing is that's going to be hard work. It's hard. That may not be sounding like good news to you yet, but it is. And the next slide, he talks about religion. He takes a good shot here. It's a fair shot. The next slide, it says, religion has tended to create people who think they have God in their pockets, people with quick easy, glib answers. That's how I felt 10 years ago. If the great mystery is indeed the great mystery, it will lead us into paradox, into darkness, and into journeys that never cease. It's awesome and horrible all at the same time. Now, Richard Rohr, he references some parables I never really looked at the way that he framed them. But they're Jesus talked in parables quite a bit, and some of you it drives you crazy because you just wish Jesus would get to the point instead of giving us this riddle, that we're supposed to figure out. But he wanted you to try to figure it out. That's the point of it. And there are 3 parables that he did, and I always thought they were about other things, talking about God and God's desire to redeem us and all this. There are 3 stories in the row, and they all have to do with seeing. And they all have to do with things that were lost. First a lost coin, then a lost sheep, then a lost son. And the way the first story goes is this woman figures out that she's lost one of her 10 coins, which is maybe part of her dowry or something. So it's not a small sum. It's like 10% of her portfolio. And so she goes nuts, and she starts cleaning like she's pregnant, right? She's going all over the place, trying to find what's... You who have had kids who are very long, you know what I'm talking about. But anyway, that's it. Anyway, all right, so... so she's cleaning up, and she finally finds the lost coin. And she's so happy that she calls everybody together, and she celebrates and throws a big party, cashes in a little bit of that coin, so they can celebrate together. And I always thought, it's about the searching, but the story starts where she realizes, she sees that something is missing. It's because she saw that something was missing that she tore her house apart to find what was lost. The next story is a shepherd. He's got 100 sheep, and he's moving them somewhere, and he counts them all up, and he only counts 99. He's like, uh-oh, one of my sheep's gone astray. And so he leaves the 99, and he goes after the one that's missing, and he finds it and brings it back. And he's so happy that he found the one sheep, the 1%, that he throws another big party and celebrates because the sheep was found. And we focus on, isn't that great that he goes and finds the sheep, but don't forget that it started because he saw that something was missing. His journey, in fact, the precursor to the celebration really was that he began to see what he thought was there, but wasn't. He saw that something was missing. And the final one, the story of the prodigal son, is about a guy, the second in line, the younger son, cashes in his part of the estate and goes and blows it all in sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And ends up in a pigsty, literally, and decides he wants to come back. Well, what's going on here? Now, usually when we talk about this story, and it's a rich, wonderful parable, we talk about how the father's waiting, and when he comes to his senses, the father rushes out to meet him and fully reinstates him to sonship, and it's beautiful, but let's just be aware of what started. The son didn't see what he had all along. He didn't see. These are 3 parables that are about redemption, but don't miss the first step. They were about not seeing. And once they saw what was missing, they had to go forward. And I just wonder if some of that is related to what Abraham experienced and why he would leave the comfort and security of Haran and his family name and his sprawling business. He was wealthy. Why risk it? It's because he saw something that he hadn't seen before, and he went for it. Why would Jesus, move into a season of his life? And he was, the actuarial tables were not great, so Jesus was an older guy at 30 years old, or 34-ish, 6-ish, somewhere in there when he started. Makes me really old, but what would cause him to do that, to put it all on the line? It's because I think he saw something that he was compelled to go after. Was it motivated purely by the vision? Maybe. Could it be that the life circumstance he was in also kind of helped get the soil ready for that experience? Maybe. But the point is, they saw, and they couldn't deny it anymore. This seeing thing is so critical because we don't want to see things. In fact, there are areas of our life we flat out ignore. We cover up, we look the other way. And to that, Richard Rohr gives us this on the next slide. In terms of soul work, we dare not get rid of the pain before we have learned what it has to teach us. That's why this is a very interesting insight. That's why the poor have a head start. I need to think about this. They can't resort to an instant fix to any problem. Aspirin, a trip, or some entertainment. They remain empty whether they want to or not. I thought about this, and I thought there's an element of truth to what he's saying. You know, I've been to the slum now 4 times. I call the people in the school and the leaders friends. I really feel like I know them, and they're knowing me a little bit. And there's some depth there, which is great. And I've often wondered, what is it about their spiritual vitality? And I wonder if this is part of it. You and I, if things aren't going well, you know, in my house, I don't have a big house, like 1,500 square foot or something, but, you know, if things are not going well and I don't want to deal with a problem, maybe it's a problem with a family member or something like that, which we're pretty good, but let's say we're having a really bad day. Let's say it's 1 in a million, right? And I get in there, and Lynn and I are getting on each other about what we're going to have for dinner or whatever, and we just decide we need some time. Well, what can I do? Well, I can go into a different room and watch the Giants game, which will make me more depressed lately, but it's something to do, which will, you know, help me not pay attention to the pain. Or I can go for a long walk in, you know, beautiful Northern California. Or, you know, if I want, I can drive to the movie theater and escape in that, or go wine tasting, or, you know, take an aspirin or whatever. But you know what? If you live in the slum, if that's your reality, you're in the slum, you're in the slum, you're in the slum. And your 8x8 room that you're sharing with 4 to 10 other people, that's your home. You got nowhere to go. And so I wonder if there's an element of truth to that, a little bit more honesty, because they can't help not be, about reality and about what's really going on. Pain is a great teacher if we'll let it. And Richard Rohr goes on to say, that is the great language of religion. So what he's saying here is the greatest religions are all teaching this same truth. It teaches us to enter willingly, trustingly into the dark periods of life. These dark periods are good teachers. Religious energy is in the dark questions, seldom in the answers. Oh, I love that. Religious energy is in the dark questions, seldom in the answers. That's where we work it out. That's where you really get shiny. We must learn to stay with the pain of life, without answers, without conclusions, and some days without meaning. That is the path, the perilous, dark path of true prayer. This foggy area of no answers, that's what he refers to as liminal space. It's space where we're in between. It's space of metanoia. That metanoia, that's a word that we have defined as repentance, but actually the word literally means beyond the mind. It's a new way of thinking. The born again thing, you know, it's not a once and done thing. It's again and again and again kind of a thing, and that's where we get that whole repentance idea. It's more than just turning it around. It's beyond. It's blowing your mind. It's choosing a new way of thinking, and in this new way of thinking, we are terrified. You know you are. First, we don't want to admit that we have stuff that is speaking into our lives, and so we ignore it. In the chapter, he brings up an interesting exchange that Jesus had with the people. So the people were asking him, give us a sign that you're the real deal. We want to know if you're the Messiah. He says, you people always want a sign. You always want a big bell and whistle show. The only sign you're going to get is the sign of Jonah, Jesus says. You familiar with the story of Jonah? It's a lovely children's tale about this guy named Jonah, who was racist. He hated the people just over the hill in Nineveh. Could not stand those people. They were awful people. There's nothing good about those people, those Ninevites. And then he got some kind of call from God saying, hey, Jonah, I want you to go tell the Ninevites to clean up their act, or I'm going to come down on them. And Jonah's like, sweet. I'm not going to tell them. I've been waiting for this forever. About time they got with their just desserts. And so they wrestle a little bit and finally decides, I so don't want to go to Nineveh that I'm going to go in the other direction. So he hops a ship and he's heading out on the Mediterranean Sea in the exact opposite direction of Nineveh. And if you know the story, hope I'm not spoiling anything here, but a big storm comes up, and everybody on board is like, we are going down. So they are dumping all their cargo, so their purpose for the whole for their trip is lost. They're going to lose all kinds of money, and they're still going down. Nothing's getting any better. They're all saying the gods are against us, the gods are against us. And finally, Jonah comes up out of the hold and says, yeah, you're right. God's against us. You know why? Because I'm running from God. This is all my fault. And we're all going to die together. Isn't that great? And so he doesn't want to go back. But he's at least being honest that this is what's going down. He would rather die at sea than go to Nineveh. And so you know what happens next? The guys throw him overboard. They throw him off the ship. He doesn't jump in. They throw him off. They're like, get out of here. How many of us have had that happen? We're not going to move. we're going to be real fine. We know the ship's going down. This could be your job, could be a relationship, could be a marriage, could be your health. I don't know what it is. You know the ship's going down. You're not budging. You're looking around at your friends who are going down with you. Yep, I know, it's me. Here we go. Isn't it great? And your friends are like, ah, like this. And if they could, they would just like, just get you out of here. Because they know you're taking them down too. And they know you need to get off the boat. Been there? Has life caught up with you enough yet to be there? You know you're there when you know you're stuck. And you don't do anything about it. When you don't have the conversation. When you don't look at your past and the pain and the heartache and the grief, and you don't want to deal with that because that hurts so much, but what you don't realize is that you're putting yourself through far more pain going forward than you would if you just went back and let God do something with it. So Jonah ends up, what happens? The sign of Jonah is he gets into the belly of a whale. Wonder what that's like. Probably not good. Probably really dark. Probably pretty scary. Probably stinks. He has to sit around in the belly of a whale. Not good, right? For 3 days, which again, don't think 3 so much as think, a season of time. And finally the whale spits him back. And it was long enough time for Jonah, once he was on dry land again, to say, all right, I'll go. And he marches up to Nineveh, gives the worst sermon that anybody's ever preached. And then he goes, sits on a hillside, hoping that nobody listened, and he's waiting for the light show to come, where they all get wiped out by God, because that's his dream still. And God kind of scolds him and, whips him around a little bit and says, you moron, you're more worried about this plant that I gave you for shade than you are about all those people out there. What is your problem, man? And Jonah never gets it, by the way. Do you get it? Are you Jonah? Just still mad, still stuck, even after getting thrown off a ship, even after spending 3 nights in the whale, still stuck, not there, maybe going through the paces, but not there. The truth is, we don't go there because it's terrifying, right? And that's the thing that drives me crazy. Richard Rohr says on the next screen, this is where we need to be helpful with each other. The believer has to tell those in pain that this is not forever. There is a light and you will see it. This isn't all there is. Trust. Don't try to rush through it. We can't leap over our grief work, nor can we skip over our despair work. We have to feel it. And I need you to do something for me. I need you to tell me that this is true. And you need to tell you that this is true. And I need to tell you that this is true. Because the painful thing is that we forget that it's true. I've lived this. I know it's true. But you know what? Even though I know it's true from my own past, I still tremble. I still tremble the next time I'm called to go to Nineveh. Go to places I don't want to go. Check my attitudes I don't want to be checked. Because in some crazy, weird, sick way, I'm more comfortable in my stuckness. And I know I need to move. I know I need to shift. And I need you to tell me. It's worth it. It's going to be all right. You got to trust it. God got you through before. God's going to get you through again. And you need to tell each other. And you need to remind each other. Because some of you know people that are really in a tough spot. And they know they need to move forward, but they are terrified. They are terrified. And they need somebody who has been there, even if you're there going through kind of your own stuff with them, which we all are, to say, it's going to be okay. So let's just say this out together so we make sure we got it. The believer has to tell those in pain that this is not forever. There is a light, and you will see it. This isn't all there is. Trust. Don't try to push through it. We can't leap over our grief work, nor can we skip over our despair work. We have to feel it. Doesn't that sound wonderful? We have to feel it, because that's when it starts to teach us. And until we feel it, until we're there in it, it can scream as loud as it wants, but we're not going to learn a damn thing. So what do we do? On the next slide, I just want you to read this, and then we're almost out of here. So read the next slide, all about yourself. Everybody read it? The last couple lines there are tough. We don't have to deny, dismiss, defy, or ignore. I hate this one. What is okay. What is the great teacher. Point of clarification. What he is not saying is that thing that happened to you that somebody did long ago, or that thing that you did, that's not the okayness we're talking about. Some of you were flat out victims. Horrific things happen to you. Horrific things happen to you. Those are not okay. That's not what Rohr is saying. Some of you did horrific things. That's not okay. The okayness that he's talking about is this. It's okay to go back and to hear what you have told yourself about what happened, about what you were told about what happened, how that thing which you've wanted to hide in your shame and your guilt and your whatever, your pain and suffering, it's okay to trust God to take you back there and unravel it. It is your teacher. It does not have to be your master. That's the okayness we're talking about. No, what happened to you is awful, but it's still there. And until we recognize it's there and it's okay to go back, we don't need to fear it anymore. We can allow God to work it in us and work through us. That's when the healing begins. That's when everything belongs. Because I can look at even the things that I've done which I'm least proud of and say, I was a part of that. I don't like it. I hate it. And I can learn from it and heal from it and move forward. And so can you. So to help us stay in this zone, Rohr offers a mantra on the next slide. God's life is living itself in me. I am aware of life living itself in me. God's life is living itself in me. I am aware of life living itself in me. And all this is on my blog, so you can read it. You don't have to write it down right now. But I would encourage you to learn this, memorize this, and speak it throughout your day. And just see what changes as you start to really own that this is true because it is true. So let's say it out loud together to make sure you got it. God's life is living itself in me. I am aware of life living itself in me. God's life is living itself in me. I am aware of life living itself in me. Let's pray together. God, help us. Seriously, God, help us. There's not one of us that is not stuck in some way. And if we're honest, we would admit that we are part of the reason that we're stuck. That we've somehow grown comfortable being stuck, that it's working for us on some level. But it's hardly the dream. It's hardly the vision. And you are calling us to trust you, to go into the void, to go into the darkness, to allow questions to be asked, that we would see why we are the way we are, why we do, what we've told ourselves our identity is, what our hopes and dreams are, who is directing our paths. All these things we discover in questions in the darkness. So God, take our hand and help us. Help us see, give us strength where we feel too weak, give us courage where we are scared to death, and help us put our hope and resurrection as we walk into our Friday of death. God help us. In Jesus' name, amen. So one final song, and as we sing this song, it's an opportunity for the ushers to come and collect support from us for what's going on here. Maybe out of prayer concern, we take those very seriously, and if you say you don't want it shared with anybody but me, that's cool. We honor that. If you want it prayed for by more people, we do that too. Or a note to help you process stuff out. If you need help and need my help with stuff, put that in there and I'll get in touch with you. And the financial support, it makes all the difference. We can't do what we do here without your help. And lives literally get impacted because of all the things that we do here, not just Sunday morning for a couple hours, but because of all the things that Crosswalk represents. Happens because you support it. And I thank you for that.